Here we go. The neutralization approach of Gresham, Sykes, and David Matska. The neutralization approach centers on rationalizations that allow offenders to shed feelings of guilt and responsibility for their behavior. Sykes and Matza believed that most people drift into and out of criminal behavior, but will not commit a crime unless they have available to them techniques of neutralization. Their study primarily concerned juveniles for whom they suggested neutralization techniques provided only a temporary respite from guilt. That respite, however, lasted long enough to avoid the twinges of conscience while a crime was being committed. Neutralization techniques include the following: denial of responsibility. For example, I'm a product of my background. Denial of injury. For example, no one was really hurt. Denial of the victim. Example, they deserved it. Condemnation of the condemners. Example, the cops are corrupt. Appeal to higher loyalties. Example, I did it for my friends. Like containment theory, restraint theories tend to depend on a general agreement as to values, or they assume that offenders are simply conformists who suffer temporary lapses. Neutralization techniques, by definition, are only needed when the delinquent has been socialized into middle-class values or where conscience is well developed. Even so, this technique does not in themselves explain the crime. Such techniques are available to us all if we make only a slight effort to conjure them up. The real question is why some people readily allow pro-offered neutralizations to affect their behavior, while others effortlessly discount them. Then there's the labeling theory. The labeling theory is a social process perspective that sees continued crime as a consequence of the limited opportunities for acceptable behavior that follow from the negative responses of society to those defined as offenders. The labeling theory is the worth of any theory of behavior and is proved by how well it reflects the reality of the social world. In practice, however, theoretical perspectives find acceptance in the academic environment via a number of considerations. Labeling theory, for example, became fashionable in the 1960s. Its popularity may have been due more to the cultural environment into which it was introduced rather than to any inherent quality of the theory itself. Labeling theory was first introduced by Frank Tannenbaum in 1938 under the rubric of tagging. He wrote, "The young delinquent becomes bad because he is defined as bad and because he is not believed that he is good." He went on to say, The process of making the criminal, therefore, is a process of tagging. It becomes a way of stimulating and evolving the very traits that are complained of. The person becomes the thing he is described as being. Tannenbaum focused on society's power to define an act or an individual as bad and drew attention to the group need for a scapegoat in explaining crime. The search for causes inherent in individuals was not yet exhausted, however, and Tannenbaum's theory fell mostly on deaf ears. By the 1960s, the social and academic environments in America had changed, and the issue of responsibility was seen more in terms of the group than the individual. In his book, Outsiders, published in 1963, Howard Becker pointed out that criminality is not a quality inherent in an act or in a person. Crime, said Becker, results from a social definition through law of unacceptable behavior. That definition arises through moral enterprise, by which groups on both sides of an issue debate and eventually legislate their notion of what is moral and what is not. Becker wrote, "Moral enterprise is the process undertaken by an advocacy group to have its values legitimate or embodied in the law. The central fact about deviance is that it is created by society. Social groups create deviance by making rules whose infraction constitutes deviance. The criminal label, however, produces consequences for labeled individuals that may necessitate continued criminality. In describing the criminal career, Becker wrote, "To be labeled a criminal, one need only commit a single criminal offense, yet the word carries a number of connotations specifying auxiliary traits characteristic of anyone bearing the label. The first time a person commits a crime, the behavior is called primary deviance and may be a merely transitory form of behavior. However, in the popular mind, a known criminal is not to be trusted, should not be hired because of the potential for crimes on the job, and would not be a good candidate for the military, marriage, or any position requiring responsibility. Society's tendency towards such thinking," Becker suggested, "closes legitimate opportunities, ensuring that the only new behavioral alternative available to the labeled criminal are deviant ones. Succeeding episodes of criminal behavior are seen as a form of secondary deviance that eventually becomes stabilized in the behavioral repertoire and self-concept of the labeled person. Labeling theory can be critiqued along a number of dimensions. First, it is not really the theory in that labeling does not uncover the genesis of criminal behavior. It is more useful in describing how such behavior continues than in explaining how it originates. Second, labeling theory does not recognize the possibility that the labeled individual may make successful attempts at reform and may shed the negative label. Finally, The theory does not provide an effective way of dealing with offenders. Should people who commit crimes not be arrested and tried so as to avoid the consequences of negative labels? It would be exceedingly naive to suggest that all repeat criminal behavior would cease, as labeling theory might predict, if people who commit crimes are not officially handled by the system.